I walked out without saying a word. No boxes, no hallway stairs, just my badge dropped in the tray like an expired key card. It made a small clack, the kind of sound you remember when your name disappears from the system. My name is Vesper Quinn. I am 39 years old, and until 20 minutes ago, I was a director in enterprise sales at one of the fastest-growing software companies on the West Coast. For almost 8 years, I closed deals that other people gave up on. Quietly, steadily. I built my reputation in silence, because that is how I work best. No drama, no speeches, just numbers that spoke for themselves. 2 days ago, I finalized an agreement with a client that had the potential to bring in $65 million over the next 3 quarters. It took 7 months of negotiations, 3 decision-makers, 5 rounds of changes, and I never missed a step. I knew the client's pain points better than they did. I didn't just sell them a product. I showed them why staying with us was the only option. That morning, my calendar had one item: final review and signing. I was supposed to walk into the boardroom, hand the client their documents, and shake on a partnership that would carry our numbers through the next 2 quarters. But I never made it to the meeting. At 7:48 a.m., I received an internal message from HR. No greeting, no context, just one line: "Please report to conference room 6B before start of day." What followed was short, sharp, phrased as if it had been approved ahead of time. They said I had bypassed new reporting procedures, that I had not kept my manager properly informed, that my communication style created visibility concerns. And so, without a warning, without a word from my boss, I was out. No meeting, no handshake, no record. The last thing I did was open my company email and send one message. I did not send it to my boss. I sent it to the client. It was polite. It was simple. It let them know I would no longer be their point of contact. It did not explain why. I left the building a few minutes later. No one stopped me. No one thanked me. And no one looked me in the eye. I did not cry. I did not panic. I had seen this play before. What they didn't know was that I had already made my move weeks ago. But I'll get to that. If you're still here, maybe on your lunch break, maybe walking out like I just did, leave a trace. Just tell me where you're listening from. And if this feels close to home, subscribe. You'll want to hear how this ends. The walk to the parking lot was quiet, but not empty, because I knew, somewhere on the other side of this silence, someone would regret what they did. It happened 4 days before the signature. I was in a meeting that I was not supposed to speak in. It was one of those full-floor reviews, the kind where everyone stares at charts they already know, nods at names they do not care about, and claps at numbers they had no part in. Julian, my manager, stood at the front with his usual calm, pointing to a slide labeled Q3 Pipeline Optimism. The word optimism was underlined. My deal was listed 4th, not by name, of course, just a title and a range. But the figure, $65 million, sat in bold font under the heading High Probability. That was new. I had never called it that. Julian had. I kept quiet. I always did. But someone at the far end of the table, someone 2 levels above Julian, asked the question I knew would come. Who's leading that one? Silence. Not for long, but long enough. Then Julian said, "That's under Vesper. She's been tracking it." He didn't look at me when he said it, and I didn't nod. I didn't need to. But the silence had done something. The moment passed, and then, almost casually, the CEO leaned in. "What's the differentiator there?" he asked. His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. Everyone looked at Julian. He looked at me. I could have said nothing, but I didn't. I explained calmly that it wasn't about discounts or software features. It was about the onboarding structure, the way we phased the client into the system with 0 downtime. I had built that model myself after the first round nearly collapsed. The CEO nodded, not to Julian, to me. "That's good," he said. "That's smart." That was the moment. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it shifted something in the room. Julian said nothing for the rest of the meeting. The next morning, he stopped by my desk and told me to take a day off before the contract signing. "You've earned it," he said, smiling just enough to let me know he didn't mean it. It was not a suggestion. It was a gesture, a pause, a quiet message. I had stepped into a light that was not mine to stand in, and that night, just hours before I was supposed to walk back into that same boardroom, I got the message from HR, one line, no punctuation. Please report to conference room 6B before start of day. By the time I arrived, the decision had already been made. Julian wasn't even in the room. I had a system, not the kind they trained you to use, not folders marked with dates or dashboards filled with color-coded updates. Mine was quieter. I kept a single notebook, always closed unless I was alone. Inside were the parts no one else remembered, the tone a client used when they said maybe, the pause before they agreed to a clause, the way someone's voice dropped when a deadline made them nervous. It wasn't for show, it wasn't for backup, it was for protection, not for myself, but for the deal. The one they removed me from was fragile, not in value, but in structure. Every part of it had been earned. I had rebuilt their trust after a failed pilot from a previous team. I had flown across the country to sit in a room no one else wanted to visit. I had rewritten the language to reflect what they feared, not what we assumed. And it worked. The client had agreed to sign, but only after I walked them through the final terms, one paragraph at a time. I told them we would move slow the first month, that I wouldn't hand them off to a new face, that the version we signed would be the version we honored, no substitutions. They believed that, because I did too. And then I was gone. By mid-morning, the team tried to pick up where I left off. Julian led us sync with legal. He spoke in general terms, buying time. Legal asked which version of the agreement was being used. Julian glanced toward someone in operations. No one answered. They all assumed someone else had the right file. But the file wasn't the problem. The draft they found had no context. The revisions were labeled by date, not by meaning. They couldn't tell which one reflected the verbal changes I'd made during the last call. They didn't know that the onboarding timeline had been swapped after the client requested a slower start. They missed the new clause that allowed for phased payments, a change that took 3 weeks of negotiation to secure. The shared drive had folders, but not the kind that solved problems. I watched the chaos from outside. One by one, the requests came in. Do you recall what version had the updated terms? Can someone confirm if client reviewed Section 4B? Was there a final on the billing structure? They didn't come to me, but the client did. Just before lunch, they sent a short note. Hi, Vesper. Please confirm who will be leading the review call tomorrow. We want to make sure we're aligned on the language from last week. They were careful with their wording, but I could read the shift. They had sensed the silence. They wanted stability. They were not going to sign anything they didn't recognize. I didn't respond. Instead, I let the silence walk ahead of me. I forwarded the message. Not to legal, not to ops, to Julian. No explanation, no follow-up. Just the original thread, untouched. I imagined his face when he read it. The timestamp, the client's tone, the pressure of pretending he had it under control. But the truth was simple. He didn't. Because the version they had approved, the one that mattered, was the version I had written down by hand during a video call they insisted not be recorded. I had written every word, confirmed every point, and promised them I would not let it slip through someone else's hands, and now they were holding me to that promise. The morning of the signing, they tried to get in, not the front doors, not the elevators, into the files, into the calls, into everything I had built without ever needing permission to do so. They called IT first, requested emergency access to all project folders under my name. Then legal stepped in. They wanted access to private notes, client drafts, follow-up logs, anything that might point to a finalized version. But they weren't looking for records. They were looking for certainty, and certainty was never kept in a folder. My notes weren't on the drive, not because I hid them, but because no one asked me to share them before they pushed me out. They had assumed what I carried was just process, replaceable, replicable, standard. They forgot that real deals, the kind that shift entire quarters, are never standard. I used to meet the client every Friday at 7 a.m., their time, not because it was required, but because that was when they felt calm enough to think. That was when they asked the real questions, the kind that never made it into emails. I knew what worried them. I knew which departments were slow to adopt change. I knew their head of procurement didn't trust automated billing. I knew which version of the contract avoided all those concerns. Julian didn't. At 9:12 a.m., he sent a message to the client. Friendly, confident. Looking forward to our call today. We'll walk through the final agreement and discuss next steps. They didn't reply. Instead, they sent a request back to the general inbox. We'd like Vesper to lead today's review. If she's no longer available, please confirm who has replaced her and when they were brought into the project. No one answered for 30 minutes. Then someone from operations forwarded the email to Julian with a single line. "Do we have a name?" I wasn't in the room, but I could imagine the silence, the shifting glances, the quiet panic of people who had deleted the one person their client still trusted. That afternoon, Julian filed an urgent request with HR, access to all of my previous project files and communication logs. But most of my work lived outside of templates, meeting summaries in notebooks, personal agreements confirmed in casual calls, relationship threads that couldn't be downloaded. What they found in my inbox was clean, polite, but empty, because I had already handed off everything I needed to the people who asked for it when it mattered. The rest, I took with me. That evening, the client sent a final message, not to me, to the company. "We'll need to delay the signing until we've reviewed the terms with a representative we recognize." It wasn't anger, it wasn't rejection, it was worse. It was the beginning of a pause they couldn't control. The first voice that reached the top wasn't Julian's, it was the client's. They bypassed every usual layer, no assistant, no delay, just a direct call to the CEO, a number they rarely used, saved only for moments that shaped quarters, not contracts. The call lasted 6 minutes, long enough to shift a company's posture. They opened with a statement, not a complaint. We were ready to sign. The structure made sense. The pace matched our needs, but something changed, and the person we trusted, she's gone. The CEO, Reese, listened without interruption. He asked for dates, names, and details. He didn't need background. He recognized the client's tone, measured, calm, decisive, the kind of tone that signaled more than disappointment. It signaled a turning point. Right after the call, he summoned Julian. The meeting took place on the executive floor, lights low, no one else invited. Reese began with a simple line. "I just spoke to the client. They're hesitating. Explain." Julian walked him through numbers, then timelines, then personnel. He spoke in layers, stacked phrases, corporate phrasing, the kind that folds in on itself. He mentioned transition plans, alignment talks, forecast revisions, but not once did he speak with the weight of someone who understood what had been lost. Reese let him finish, then asked a single question. "When did she leave?" Julian paused. That was the moment. The room had no windows, but the pressure shifted. Answers fell short of the space they were meant to fill. Later that afternoon, a finance meeting was pulled up without prior notice. The quarterly projection slide appeared. Under high priority revenue, $65 million. The client's name sat in a line of bold text. Next to it, Vesper Quinn, account owner. No one had updated it. Reese looked around the table. "She's still listed. Does this number hold?" The slide stayed up. Everyone stayed still. Then Reese asked the question that didn't need follow-up. Who closed it? No strategy, no filter, just clarity. Julian shifted in his seat. He gestured toward the broader team. He mentioned group collaboration, multi-phase contribution, support roles. His voice stayed even, but the timeline in his answer drifted. People noticed. Across the table, one person pulled out an internal summary. They flipped to the negotiation log. Every note circled back to the same initials, VQ. No one spoke them aloud, but they didn't need to. That evening, legal flagged the client delay as material. Compliance joined the call. HR was asked for a review of personnel transitions in the last 4 weeks. Reese asked for everything tied to the deal. One sentence appeared across all reports. Primary relationship, Vesper Quinn. The number stayed where they had placed it, right in the center of the screen. $65 million, framed by a confident title, revenue confirmed for the next 3 quarters. It looked steady, clean, safe, but no one in that room believed it anymore. The estimate had come from weeks of updates, pieces pulled from different departments, gathered, approved, and polished for the board. But that number had one real source, me. I had built it over months. Every detail was based on conversations that went far beyond emails. The timing of payments, the start date, the small risks the client never wanted in writing, all of it came from my side. I knew what they needed before they asked, and I knew what they feared if we moved too fast. Now the number sat alone, my name still underneath it. But no one left could explain what it truly meant. They began to pull reports, one by one, looking for confirmation. A team member checked the latest version of the agreement. It had comments, not signatures. The pricing looked correct, but one term had changed since the last approval. The page about technical setup had a note marked, "Pending Review." Someone pointed out a line that had been revised 2 weeks earlier, but no one could say who had made the change. Questions circled fast. Is this version the one we sent? Did the client approve this section? Are we sure this payment schedule is accurate? Every answer led to a pause, and every pause led back to the same place. The person who used to answer those questions was no longer here. Julian tried to speak. He reminded them that the deal was in progress, that the client had never raised objections, that everything would be resolved soon. But the room had already begun to shift. Someone from finance asked, "Who has confirmed this number recently?" Another added, "Has anyone spoken to the client this week directly?" A voice from the far end of the table said, "She was always the one on the weekly calls. She knew which version we were using. She set the timeline." And then Reese, the chief executive, stepped in with a question no one had prepared for. If she was not leading the final phase, why is she still listed as the owner of the deal? The sentence landed without echo, just stillness, sharp and cold. Julian adjusted his seat. His hands stayed folded. He began to talk about collaboration, about team structures, about shared responsibility. But the words moved slowly, and no one followed them. By mid-morning, the team removed the number from the confirmed list. They didn't erase it, just changed its color. From green to gray, a small shift, but enough to signal that trust had slipped. The room didn't speak my name after that. But the absence stayed. Every chart, every slide, every question now carried a space no one could fill. The deal was supposed to fund more than a sales victory. It was tied to promises. In the final week of the quarter, leadership reviewed a proposal to unlock bonus shares for the executive team. The calculation leaned heavily on one line, $65 million, labeled as revenue expected before year-end. It sat in every projection. That amount was the difference between exceeding targets and barely reaching them. It shaped how much managers would receive, how many roles would be open next quarter, and how far the company could stretch its narrative when presenting to investors. Julian had submitted the proposal himself. He had written that the deal was in closing. He had attached 3 slides to justify it. He had made sure his name appeared twice. Mine did not appear at all. By that point, the client had gone quiet. No emails, no reschedule, no explanation. The company waited, checking inboxes that stayed empty. Some tried calling, others asked if the client might be reconsidering terms. One person wondered if a delay meant legal was still reviewing, but I already knew what silence meant. Silence is not absence, it is preparation. That Friday, the client's senior contact forwarded a message to the company's general inbox. The subject line was short, "Duplicate proposal." The body was shorter. "We've received this structure from another party. Please confirm whether this reflects your intended offer." The forwarded message showed a familiar set of terms. The pricing was identical. The timeline matched. The headings were slightly changed, but I recognized the phrasing. It was the exact version I had walked the client through 2 weeks earlier, word for word, except it didn't come from the company. It came from a competitor. I didn't need to guess who had shared it. The path was too clean. Only a few people had access to that version. Julian was one of them. He had tried to keep the deal alive, just not through his own hands. The client hadn't responded to the offer. They hadn't rejected it either. They had paused, stepped back, and now they were asking a different question. Who controls this deal? Inside the company, the silence turned sharp. People stopped replying to group messages. The bonus proposal sat on the table during the executive review, unsigned, unresolved. No one wanted to be the one who approved a payout based on a number that had just leaked out through a side door. The chief executive asked for a delay. Julian tried to defend the structure. He pointed to earlier notes. He said the client had not declined, but the room had already shifted. They weren't reacting to a lost deal. They were reacting to a sign that someone inside had tried to move it without permission. And they were starting to ask the question no one had spoken aloud yet. If the person who held the deal steady was gone, and the one who claimed credit had just lost control of it, then who exactly had been running the show? The subject line arrived on a quiet afternoon. No noise in the hallway, no new meetings, just a single notification in the inbox of a private account I no longer used for work. Hope we can reconnect. Julian's name sat above it, still spelled clean, still wearing the same title. The message began with warmth or the shape of it. Wanted to reach out and say I regret how things unfolded. Would love to find a way to work together again. There may be a role in a consulting capacity. No acknowledgement of what he had done. No mention of the proposal he had passed along through back channels. No ownership of the silence that had followed the client's request for answers. He ended with a line that nearly made me smile. We're still hoping to salvage the relationship. As if it was still theirs to salvage, I didn't respond, but I did forward it. To the chief executive, I added no note, just the email, and one other file, a recording. Not dramatic, not secret. Just an old call from a month earlier, before the signing date was set, before the calendar had shifted. Julian's voice came through clearly, calm, pleased, mid-conversation. She's done her part, he said. Once the contract's prepped, we'll take it from here. He didn't say it like a plan, he said it like a move already made, the kind of line that tells you someone believes the deal is theirs now, no matter who built it. I never sent that recording when I left, not out of fear, just timing. Letting people fail at their own pace has a special kind of weight. That week, the internal thread shifted tone. A senior partner quietly flagged the forwarded proposal in an investor update. Another asked whether future deals should require new access policies. One person, not someone from my team, tagged Julian and wrote, "Can you clarify who originally structured the phased rollout plan?" He didn't reply. I didn't read the rest. By then, I had moved on. My badge was long gone, my name erased from their directory. But the terms I had written still echoed through every empty reply, every stalled meeting, every version of the contract they no longer trusted. And in every attempt to pull the pieces back together, they kept discovering the same thing. The only person who could fix it was no longer interested. The first sign wasn't a message, it was the absence of one. Every morning that week, someone refreshed the thread. Nothing arrived. No updates, no requests. Just an empty string of messages stretched longer with each passing hour. A name stayed pinned at the top, one the team had relied on for months. But the replies had stopped. The client wasn't asking questions anymore. They weren't sending corrections. They had gone quiet in the way experienced clients do when they are already somewhere else. Inside the office, people stayed later than usual. Lights stayed on past 9. Desks filled with silent gestures. Papers stacked, tabs open, coffee left half finished. One manager rewrote the onboarding plan for the 3rd time. Another drafted a new pricing model. Softer, thinner, cheaper than the one I had fought to protect. No one said it out loud, but they were trying to rebuild something without the blueprint. They were working from fragments. Julian stayed in his office most of the day. He didn't speak much, but he approved a new outreach, a final message sent to the client framed as reassurance. We understand the hesitation. We remain open to adjustments. Please let us know how you'd like to proceed. It was sent at 5:40 in the evening. Polite, precise, empty. I read it. Not because they copied me. They didn't. The client did. They forwarded it to me with a single line. Thought you should see this. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The deal had already chosen its direction. 3 days later, the news reached them. Not through a call, not even through a direct email. It came as a link. A short press release, released through the client's official page, titled cleanly, 5 paragraphs, standard language. But the final line cut deeper than anything else that quarter. The agreement will be executed in partnership with Alta North Group. No one in my old office had heard of the name. Some Googled it. Some checked the registration. It was a new firm, small, sharp, built to move fast. The leadership page listed 5 names. Mine was 4th. Vesper Quinn Partner Client Strategy. No flourish, no headline, just listed as if I had always belonged there. The following day, Julian canceled 2 meetings. His assistant closed his calendar for the week. A quiet change appeared in the internal directory. His name slid to on leave. No one said why. Inside the company, the conversations dimmed. The number, 65 million, was removed from every forecast. A different color appeared in the dashboards where green had once held. Gray, then blank. They didn't call. They didn't write. Not out of pride, out of knowledge. Because even those who had never worked beside me now understood something that could no longer be ignored. The deal had never been theirs to claim. It had only passed through their system. But it had grown in my hands, and the moment they let go of me, they let go of the only connection that mattered. They opened the old folder that morning, the one marked Client Final, with a label printed too early and a signature line left too late. Inside, the contract remained untouched, 73 pages, full formatting, prepared, reviewed, and stored as if certainty could be printed into paper. The document held the company's colors, the client's name, and a space for the moment that never came. 2 people from legal reviewed it in silence. They read each page slowly, checking for updates they already knew were missing. One highlighted a section. The other just looked at the line that waited for a name. No one had touched the file since the day I walked out. The formatting held, but the meaning had drained. It wasn't a contract anymore. It was a record of assumption. Later that day, an intern was asked to refile it. She placed it back into its sleeve, slid it into the cabinet, and closed the drawer. No ceremony, no memo. Just one more artifact in a system built for speed but not for silence. Across the city, the real version of that deal moved forward. The client finalized the signature just after 10:30. No call, no hesitation. The terms remained exactly as we had built them, structured across 3 quarters, phased rollout, anchored by a delivery plan designed for a company that refused to be rushed. The confirmation came in a file transfer, short subject line, clean attachments. Inside, a copy of the signed contract. Alongside it, a message sent from the client directly to my inbox. Contract closed, structure held. Thanks for the framework. I opened the file and scrolled, slowly. Each section returned in order: timeline, pricing, transition windows. The details aligned with the final version I had kept in my notes, the one built after our last early morning call, when they asked me whether this time would hold. It did. On the last page, under the client's signature, a small note appeared. Not a logo, not a quote, just a line. Initial consultation and deal design, Vesper Quinn. They hadn't asked if I wanted credit. They didn't ask permission to write it. They simply placed it there. As fact. Meanwhile, inside the company I had left, another meeting had been scheduled. A standing update slot, originally created for this account alone. Only 2 people showed up. The room stayed quiet. The screen remained off. No documents were opened. One of them asked why, without turning their chair, should we remove it from the forecast? The other nodded. The line disappeared the next hour. No one replaced it. But the original document, the one they had printed, labeled, and stored, remained in that drawer, its last page still blank, still expecting a name, still waiting for a moment they believed belonged to them. It won't be revised. It won't be passed on. It will sit there until someone forgets what it was for. Because the deal is closed, the work is moving, and the only version that lives carries a name they can no longer reach.